Hello and welcome to the Vaults of Terra. My name is Ed and today we're going to be continuing our Space Marine chapter videos by looking at the Space Wolves, as voted by you guys. Now I know that the Space Wolves are a first founding chapter and have a lot of lore associated with them, so what I'm going to be doing today is splitting down these videos into 4 separate parts, dealing with the Space Wolves as an overall chapter in 2 videos, and then dealing with specific parts of the chapter in 2 other videos that I'll be presenting afterwards. What we're going to be talking about this week is the Space Wolves overall, basically their chapter in relation to how the outsiders see them and a little bit of their history as well. So, the Space Wolves, also known as the Volca Fenrica, or Wolves of Fenris in Fenrisian, are the 4th legion of the 20 Space Marine chapters. Their Primarch was Leman Russ, and after the Heresy the legion was divided into 2 chapters, the Space Wolves chapter and the Wolf Brothers. However, the Wolf Brothers suffered from mutation and were disbanded. It's unknown if there were other subsequent chapters related to the Space Wolves in the second founding, but there may be other chapters that came about in other subsequent foundings. Now, the Space Wolves are notorious for their ferocity in battle and their defiance of authority, including the Codex Astartes. Now, a few basic statistics. The chapter master of the Space Wolves at this time is Logan Grimnar. Their fortress monastery is on Fenris, and it is called the Fang, a giant hollow mountain inside of which lies the fortress monastery. Their colours are grey overall with yellow on their shoulder pads and other details. They also have a head-on assault speciality, so they're good at dealing with enemies directly, and their current battle cry is "For Russ and the Allfather," which is rather grandiose comparative to what we heard recently. So, moving on from that, we're going to talk a little bit about their homeworld. Now, Fenris is a place of contrast. It orbits its sun once every 2 Terran years. During what we would call the summer months, volcanoes erupt, burning great areas with lava flows and churning the seas, spreading great floods, tidal waves and earthquakes to the islands of the planet. As the planet enters its long winter, however, the temperature drops so far that most of the continents and oceans actually ice over, giving the appearance of a snowball from orbit. Apart from a single area of the planet, called Asserheim by the natives, Fenris is a world of shifting geography. Asteroid strikes, mutable coastlines, and even risen or sunken island masses have resulted in the population becoming largely nomadic barbarian tribes. The tribes constantly seek secure territory, and as a result skirmishes and feuds over land is common. The people, along with the flora and fauna, are hardened to the changes in the temperature and the extremes of the locale in which they are located. The planet itself is actually located relatively close to the Eye of Terror, the large warp storm I have mentioned in previous videos, where the reality is mixed with the chaos of the warp. However, the planet is relatively pure, and there is no real reason that we know of because of this. Now we move on to the Space Wolves' history. Now this actually began during the Great Crusade, and I've yet to make a video on the Great Crusade, so we're not going to actually talk a lot about the occurrences that happened here. I'm going to do specific videos relating to this. However, I will give you a broad overview of what happened. Now the Primarch, Leman Russ, of the Space Wolves chapter, whose gene seed is the basis of all their implants, grew up on this planet of Fenris, and it was inhabited at the time by very primitive and warlike tribes of humans. Now he was discovered living in the wild by a man named Thengir, and he was the king of the Russ, and gave the name to this wild man, Leman Russ. Now the Primarch, once discovered, learned the ways of man quickly, and many legends sprung up around him. On Thengir's death, Leman became the tribal leader of the Russ clan, and eventually was able to take over most of Fenris with his renowned battle prowess. After this, the Emperor travelled to Fenris, having heard of one who could be a Primarch leading the people of this world. On arriving, Russ refused to acknowledge the Emperor's authority and challenged him to prove it. The challenges consisted of 3 different contests, one in eating, one in drinking, and one in fist fighting. Russ managed to beat the Emperor at both eating and drinking, but the 3rd challenge went to the Emperor, showing the Emperor that Russ was in fact his son, proving his ferocity and tactical knowledge in combat that only a Primarch could show. Of course, Russ blamed his loss on alcohol, but capitulated and chose to follow imperial rule. Russ fought well during the Great Crusade, gaining a reputation as both cunning and fierce, albeit slightly unstable, as a warrior and leader. Now, during this period, there was also a specific event that happened between the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves. During a pacification war, the Dark Angels Legion, led by their Primarch Lion L. Johnson, aided the Space Wolves in the pacification. The ruler of this planet insulted Leman Russ's honour, and so he wanted to defeat the leader personally for the insult. The Dark Angels and the Space Wolves, both led by their respective Primarchs, assaulted the tower where the leader was. Leman Russ burst into the throne room just in time to see the Lion beheading the enemy leader. Angry that the honour was not his, Leman Russ punched the Lion in the jaw. This led to a battle that lasted a week or more between the 2 Primarchs, until finally Russ saw how immature their squabble was and started to laugh. Lion took this as a Russ mocking him and punched Leman Russ into unconsciousness before leaving the planet with his legion. This assault has led to a bitter feud between the legions and subsequent chapters, which lasts to this day. It is still customary for selected champions from both sides to engage in usually non-lethal combat when the chapters meet outside battle. Now, moving on to the Horus Heresy, again we're going to do specific videos relating to this. However, just prior to the Horus Heresy, the Space Wolves came into conflict with one of their other Space Marine brothers for the first time. The Primarch of the Thousand Suns Legion, Magnius the Red, had ignored the Emperor's command not to use warp-based sorcery. The Space Wolves were then ordered by the Emperor to bring Magnus before him and answer for these crimes. Russ, however, was convinced by Horus to launch an attack on the Thousand Suns rather than attempt to negotiate. The assault upon the Suns' homeworld of Prospero was furious and rather successful. However, many of the Suns, including Magnus himself, escaped into the wild region of space known as the Eye of Terror, funnily enough close to where Fenris is located. A blood feud still exists between the Wolves and the survivors of the Thousand Suns, who are now dedicated to the Chaos god Tzeentch. Now, during the Horus Heresy, the Space Wolves were quite far from Terra, having fought the Thousand Suns, and alongside the Dark Angels were unable to assist their loyalist brethren in fighting in the Siege of Terra, although they hastened back to Terra on hearing of this siege. Knowing of the imminent arrival of these two legions would tip the balance in the favour of the loyalists, Horus allowed the Emperor to personally attack him in a gamble to swiftly end the war. The two legions arrived just after the battle was concluded, with Horus and Sanguinius of the Blood Angels Legion lying dead and the Emperor mortally wounded. Now, Leman Russ was devastated by his inability to save the Emperor. After the heresy was completed and all the resistance was crushed, Russ held a great feast on Fenris. At this feast he declared he would be leaving the Space Wolves and would return in time for the final battle. He then vanished, and is said to have gone into the Eye of Terror to continue hunting down the traitorous Marines who fought against the Emperor. Another tale which conflicts this is actually that Russ vanished after chasing a cabal of Dark Elder who raided Fenris right from their central city of Comoraga. Any evidence of either theory is yet to be presented, and there is a large possibility that both are fables. The true whereabouts of the Primarch remain a mystery. Apparently Magnus the Red knows, but the Demon Prince of the Thousand Suns is not sharing that information with anyone outside his traitorous ranks. Now I'm going to move on to a little bit of a timeline of their recent history. It's not going to be anything too detailed, because I will be mentioning specific details in our battle series, which will be coming soon. However, there are some significant events we do need to hear about. Now, in the timeline we're talking about, in Millennium 32, the Battle of the Fang occurred. Now, this was quite an important battle, as it actually took place on Fenris, and is one of the few outside assaults that has ever been recorded on this hostile world. In Millennium 36, in the Skarath Crusade, as I've mentioned before, the Space Wolves were the first to use the Predator Annihilator against the Chaos forces, proving their ingenuity this early on in the Imperium's history. Now we move into the 41st millennium, so I'll stop saying which millennium it is and start saying the year. Now the first year we're talking about is 444. In the First War for Armageddon, Logan Grimnar led 300 Space Wolves alongside 100 Grey Knights against Angron, Primarch of the World Eater Space Marines, and a horde of Khornate Berserkers. In 445, after the First War for Armageddon, is the Months of Shame. Now, in the aftermath of Armageddon, the Space Wolves moved to protect the Imperial Guard and the civilians from Armageddon from the Inquisitional Purges, leading to the first Cold War and eventual direct clash between these two powers. At the conflict's peak, Fenris itself was besieged. In the year 837, the Flesh Tearers and the Space Wolves actually crossed swords for the first time. In the year 886, the Ecclesiarchy arrived on Fenris to investigate a claim of their worship of pagan gods. The Space Wolves' orbital defences fired upon the Ecclesiarchy vessels, chasing them away. Almost a year later, an Ecclesiarchy fleet and 3 orders of Adeptus Sororitas attempted to land on Fenris by force. A 3-week war erupts before the Ecclesiarchy decides to withdraw. In the year 894, in the Betalis Crusade, the Space Wolves battle alongside the Cadian Imperial Guard to push the Elder off the mining world of Betilius III. In the year 897, the Space Wolves engaged the High Fleet Colossus and the World Theresiacs. In the year 926, the third purging of Lasiriat took place, where 5 companies of Space Wolves were deployed to battle the Red Corsairs of the Lastrari system, but were eventually forced to withdraw. In the year 966, the Battle of Cavarium Alpha, where the Space Wolves engaged the Tau Empire in an underwater battle on this ocean world. Now we come up to the year 999, which is the current year in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. This is the time of the Orantep raid, where many suspect the 13th Great Company of the Space Wolves to be behind the miraculous and mysterious defeat of the Black Legion forces assaulting the mining world. Also in this year is the 13th Black Crusade, where the Space Wolves committed 12 great companies to fight against the Black Crusade. The Space Wolves are one of only 4 Space Marine chapters to have fought in both the Third War of Armageddon and against the 13th Black Crusade, who I will be mentioning later. Now finally we're going to talk about the culture for the last part of this video. Now the culture of the Space Wolves is rather unique. Although loyal to the Emperor, the Space Wolves are known for their fiercely anti-authoritarian behaviour. They strongly resist the central command structure of the Imperium and refuse to follow the Codex Astartes. They hold particular disdain for the Inquisition, due in part to the organisation's purging of Imperial citizens that survived the First War of Armageddon. Of all the Adeptus Astartes, the Wolves of Fenris regard themselves as Imperium's ultimate weapon and are proud of it. While the other chapters, such as the Ultramarines, were able to build empires and forge great worlds, the Wolves were made to destroy them, and anyone who opposes the Emperor, including other Astartes. The Wolves are almost as renowned for their passion for eating, drinking and storytelling, when not engaged in battle. In contrast to their monastic habits of other chapters, as they enjoy the feasting, eating enormous amounts of meat and guzzling mjord, a liquor so potent that it would actually kill a normal human being. To many outsiders, the Space Wolves appear to be barbarous and lacking in self-control, but in reality it actually takes a great deal of discipline and focus to be dangerous and capable as anything the Space Wolves are. Their original, unique and effective organisation seems not to hinder them at all, but instead allows them operational freedom to potentially be the most dangerous loyalist chapter when acting as a group. The Space Wolves apply a great deal of attention to planning and coordination of their pack's movement in battle, and encirclement of the prey and the cleanness of the kill are part of their tactical doctrines. Now I've finished speaking about the overall culture and history of the Space Wolves, we're going to move on to our next video, which will then talk about the Organisations of Space Wolves chapter. So thank you for watching this video. Remember, the voting is now open to choose the next Space Marine to receive the chapter video treatment. Now remember to put your votes in the comments below, and actually you can message me with your votes if you prefer not to make them public. I'd also like to remind people that the Adeptus Sororitas and the Chaos Space Marine chapters are not chapters of the Space Marines, so please don't mention them, it looks a little bit silly. Okay then, I hope to see you in the next video.